There is a bottle sitting in kitchens all across this country. Most people buy it at the grocery store without a second thought. They pay $4, $5, sometimes $6 for it. They use a tablespoon here and there, and then they put it back on the shelf. What almost none of them know is that the exact same thing, the very same liquid, is sitting in their backyard right now, rotting on the ground. Every autumn, backyard apple trees drop more fruit than any family can eat. Apples that bruise when they fall. Apples with soft spots. Apples that are perfectly good but simply too many. And most of them end up in the compost, or left to go brown in the grass, quietly wasted. But those apples, the bruised ones, the ones that fell too soon, the ones that seem like they have already passed their moment, those are exactly the apples this process needs. By the end of this video, every apple that would have gone to waste is going to look completely different, because what comes out of a jar of backyard apples, given nothing but time and the right conditions, is one of the most useful things a kitchen pantry can hold: apple cider vinegar, made at home from fruit that costs nothing, in a process that takes about 15 minutes of actual work and several weeks of patience. And here is the part that changes everything once it is understood. Store-bought apple cider vinegar and homemade apple cider vinegar are not the same thing. Not even close. What that difference is, why it matters, and exactly how to make it from scratch is all coming. But first, stay with this for just one more moment, because there is a stage in this process, somewhere around week 2 or 3, where the jar is going to look like something has gone seriously wrong. The liquid will be murky. There will be something floating on the surface that looks like it should not be there, and every instinct will say to throw it out and start over. That would be the single most costly mistake in the entire process. What that thing is, and why finding it is actually the best sign the batch could give, is coming later in this video. Do not skip ahead. If this channel is new to you, subscribe before moving on. New videos go up every week covering everything that goes into a real backyard pantry. The button is right below. It is free, and it means none of this gets missed. Most of the apple cider vinegar on grocery store shelves has been pasteurized. That means it was heated to a temperature high enough to kill off the living organisms inside it. The result is a clear, shelf-stable product that looks clean and consistent in the bottle, and that is almost entirely inert. Homemade apple cider vinegar is not inert. It is alive. The fermentation process that creates it leaves behind something called the mother, a living colony of beneficial bacteria and enzymes that forms naturally during fermentation. It looks like a thin, cloudy web drifting through the liquid, or sometimes a soft rubbery disc floating near the surface. It is harmless. It is natural. And it is the sign that the vinegar is exactly what it is supposed to be. The mother is also what makes homemade apple cider vinegar so useful in the pantry, because it is not just vinegar. It is vinegar that is still active, still working, and still capable of starting a new fermentation, if it is given the chance. Commercial producers filter and pasteurize the mother out, because it makes the product look cloudy and inconsistent on a store shelf. What they are removing is the most valuable part of what they made. A homemade batch keeps the mother intact. The vinegar that results is darker, more complex in flavor, and carries a depth that the filtered version simply does not have. That is what is being made here, and it starts with the apples. The apples that make the best apple cider vinegar are not the prettiest ones on the tree. They are the ones that fell, the ones with a bruise on one side, the ones that split at the stem, the cores and peels left over after a day of baking or sauce making. Even apples that might seem too far gone for eating are often still perfectly suited for fermentation. The only apples that should not go into the jar are ones that have gone fully rotten, with visible mold growing through the flesh. Surface bruising is fine, a soft spot is fine, but deep rot that has reached the core means that apple belongs in the compost, not the batch. Variety matters less than most people think. Sweet apples, tart apples, old heritage varieties, young modern ones, all of them will ferment. Though a mix of sweet and tart apples tends to produce a more balanced and complex vinegar than a single variety alone. If the backyard tree grows one kind of apple, that is enough. If there are windfalls from 2 different trees, even better. Do not peel the apples, do not core them, Chop them roughly into chunks, skin, seeds, core, and all. The skin carries wild yeast on its surface, the same wild yeast that drives the first stage of fermentation. Removing the skin removes the engine that starts the whole process. Do not wash the apples with soap. A gentle rinse under cold water is enough to remove dirt, but soap will strip the wild yeast from the surface and slow or prevent fermentation from taking hold. Fill the jar loosely, not packed, roughly 2/3 full of chopped apple, leaving room for the liquid and for the fermentation to move. The equipment list for homemade apple cider vinegar is almost embarrassingly simple. A wide-mouthed glass jar, a piece of cloth or a coffee filter to cover the top, a rubber band to hold it in place, and a dark, warm corner of the kitchen to leave it in. That is it. The jar should be glass, not plastic, not metal. Vinegar is acidic, and over the weeks it takes to ferment, it will react with both plastic and metal in ways that affect the flavor and the quality of the finished product. Glass is neutral. It does not react, and it allows the batch to be checked visually without disturbing it. The cover needs to allow airflow but keep insects out. A piece of cheesecloth, a thin cotton cloth, or a coffee filter secured with a rubber band works perfectly. The fermentation process requires oxygen during the first stage. A sealed lid will trap carbon dioxide and prevent the fermentation from developing properly. The location matters more than most people expect. Apple cider vinegar ferments best in a warm environment between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. A spot that stays consistently warm, away from direct sunlight, is ideal. A kitchen counter near the stove, a shelf above a water heater, a warm corner of a pantry. The fermentation will happen in a cold kitchen, but it will happen more slowly and less reliably. Now, the brine that goes over the apples. Dissolve 1 to 2 tablespoons of sugar in 1 quart of water. The sugar feeds the wild yeast in the early stages of fermentation and gives the process something to work with while the apple juice is still releasing from the fruit. Raw sugar or white sugar both work. Do not use honey at this stage. Honey has its own antimicrobial properties that can interfere with the fermentation. Pour the sweetened water over the chopped apples until they are fully submerged. Every piece of apple needs to be below the surface of the liquid. Any apple floating above the brine is exposed to open air and can develop surface mold that has nothing to do with fermentation and everything to do with rot. Weigh the apples down, a Ziploc bag filled with water, a smaller jar, a clean stone. Anything that keeps the fruit below the surface. Cover the jar with the cloth, secure with a rubber band, and set it somewhere warm. The waiting begins, and the first thing that happens is the part most people are not prepared for. Within the first 2 to 3 days, the jar will start to change. Bubbles will appear, rising slowly through the liquid. The smell coming from the jar will shift from fresh apple to something yeasty and slightly alcoholic, like cider, like a farmhouse in autumn. The liquid will begin to cloud. This is the first stage of fermentation. The wild yeast from the apple skins is consuming the sugar in the brine and converting it into alcohol. The batch is not making vinegar yet. It is making hard cider, and that hard cider is the foundation that the vinegar will eventually build on. This stage takes 1 to 2 weeks. During that time, stir the jar gently once a day with a clean spoon, pushing the apples down below the surface, checking that nothing is floating above the brine, and letting the fermentation breathe. Around day 10 or 12, the bubbling will slow. The smell will deepen, becoming less yeasty and more tart. That is the signal that the first stage is completing. Strain the apples out of the liquid, pressing them gently to release as much juice as possible. Discard the solids, and return the liquid to the clean jar. Cover again with the cloth. Now the second stage begins, and this is where something remarkable happens. The liquid that is now sitting in that jar is hard cider and left open to the air, with the wild bacteria that have been developed throughout the first stage. It is going to convert itself into vinegar without any further help at all. The bacteria responsible for this conversion are called acetobacter. They consume the alcohol in the cider and produce acetic acid in return. Acetic acid is vinegar, and it builds slowly, week by week, until the batch has fully converted. This stage takes 3 to 4 more weeks, sometimes longer in a cool kitchen. The smell will shift again during this time, moving from cidery and alcoholic to something sharper, tangier, more distinctly vinegar. And somewhere in the middle of that second stage is the moment that was mentioned at the beginning of this video. Still with us? Beautiful. Because the most important part of the entire process is coming right now. If this channel is new, subscribe before moving on. New videos go up every week. The button is right below. It is free, and it means none of this gets missed. Somewhere around week 2 or 3 of the second stage, something will appear on the surface of the liquid. It will look like a thin film at first, pale, slightly cloudy, almost transparent, sitting on top of the vinegar like a skin that formed overnight. By the following week, it will be thicker, more defined, sometimes rubbery to the touch if the jar is tilted, sometimes breaking apart into strands that drift down through the liquid below. This is the mother. It is not mold. It is not contamination. It is not a sign that the batch has failed. It is the single best sign the batch can give. The mother is a living colony of Acetobacter bacteria, the same bacteria that are converting the alcohol into acetic acid. When a mother forms, it means the fermentation is active, healthy, and working exactly as it should. The batch is on track. Do not skim it off. Do not disturb it. Do not shake the jar. The mother is fragile in its early stages, and breaking it apart unnecessarily can slow the final stage of fermentation. Leave it. Watch it grow. Let it do its work. The only surface growth that is a problem is fuzzy mold, green, black, or pink, sitting on top of the liquid. That means something went wrong. Most likely that a piece of apple was left floating above the brine during the first stage, or that the jar was in a location too cold for healthy fermentation. That batch should be discarded. But the mother, that pale, cloudy, drifting film, is something to protect, because once this batch is finished, that mother can be saved, transferred to a new jar of fresh apple juice or hard cider, and used to start the next batch in a fraction of the time. A healthy mother can be kept alive and used indefinitely. Some home fermenters have maintained the same mother for years. The vinegar is ready when it smells and tastes like vinegar, sharp, tangy, bright, with a depth and fruitiness that no store-bought version carries. Taste it weekly during the second stage. When it has reached the right sharpness, it is done. Strain it through a fine mesh strainer or cheesecloth into a clean jar or bottle, leaving the mother behind or transferring it carefully for future use. Seal the bottle and store at room temperature or in a cool pantry. Homemade apple cider vinegar does not need refrigeration. It is self-preserving. The acidity that makes it vinegar is also what keeps it stable. It will keep for a year or longer, and it will improve steadily as it sits. Now, what to do with it once it is made? The first use, and the one that earns its place in a preservation pantry immediately, is pickling. Homemade apple cider vinegar makes one of the best quick pickling brines a kitchen can produce. Its acidity is gentler than white distilled vinegar. Its flavor is fruitier and more complex, and the result is a pickled vegetable that tastes like it came from a thoughtful kitchen rather than a factory line. The ratio is simple: 1 part apple cider vinegar to 1 part water, with 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of sugar dissolved in. Bring it just to a simmer. Pour it over sliced cucumbers, onions, radishes, the green beans, or any firm vegetable packed into a clean jar, and let it cool to room temperature before sealing and refrigerating. Quick pickles made this way will keep in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 weeks. They do not need a canning pot. They do not need processing, and they use the vinegar that the backyard produced from fruit that would otherwise have gone to waste. The apple undertone in the vinegar pairs especially well with root vegetables, carrots, beets, and turnips, giving the finished pickle a quiet fruitiness that lifts the whole flavor without announcing itself. The second use is one most gardeners never think of, and one that solves a very specific late-season problem: fresh herbs. At the end of the growing season, there is almost always more than can be dried or frozen. Bundles of thyme, sprigs of tarragon, stalks of rosemary, all coming in at once as the first frost approaches. Packing fresh herbs into a jar of apple cider vinegar preserves them in a way that drying does not. The volatile oils that give fresh herbs their fragrance and flavor are fat-soluble. Drying drives off moisture, but it also drives off some of those oils with it. Vinegar preservation keeps more of the fresh character intact. Pack a clean jar loosely with fresh herb sprigs. Pour apple cider vinegar over them until fully submerged, seal, and store in a cool, dark place for 2 to 4 weeks before using. What results is a herb-infused vinegar that carries the full flavor of the fresh herb into every month of winter. Use it in salad dressings, marinades, sauces, or anywhere a splash of something bright and herbal would lift a dish. The herbs themselves can be strained out and discarded after a month or left in the jar to continue steeping. The longer they sit, the deeper the infusion becomes. The third use is the simplest, and the one that gets reached for most often once the bottle is on the kitchen shelf. A basic vinaigrette made with homemade apple cider vinegar is a different thing entirely from one made with the commercial version. The fruitiness of the homemade vinegar does not need to be masked with extra sweetener. The complexity it brings to a simple oil and vinegar dressing is enough to make it interesting on its own. 3 parts good olive oil to 1 part apple cider vinegar, a small spoonful of mustard to help it emulsify, a pinch of salt, a crack of black pepper. Shake it together in a jar and it is done. That dressing will keep at room temperature for a week. It will go on everything from a simple garden salad to roasted root vegetables coming out of winter storage, and every time it is used. It is a bottle of backyard apples that would have gone to waste. The fourth use is the one that belongs most firmly in a preservation pantry. A dilute apple cider vinegar wash extends the shelf life of fresh produce, and it does it without chemicals, without wax coatings, and without any of the commercial treatments that most store-bought produce has already been through before it reaches a kitchen. The ratio is simple. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar stirred into a bowl of cold water. Soak fresh fruit and vegetables in that solution for 5 to 10 minutes before storing, then rinse and dry thoroughly. The mild acidity of the vinegar wash inhibits the surface mold and bacteria that cause fresh produce to deteriorate. Strawberries washed this way last 3 to 4 days longer than unwashed ones. Leafy greens stay crisp and dry in the refrigerator for nearly a week longer. Root vegetables hold their skin integrity better through cold storage. It is one of the most practical uses a bottle of homemade apple cider vinegar can have in a working pantry, and it costs almost nothing because the apples cost nothing, and the process that turned them into vinegar cost almost nothing either. Every autumn, apple trees drop more than any family can use. For most gardeners, those apples have always meant the same thing: a few days of baking, a batch of sauce, and then the slow brown rot of everything that was left behind on the grass. But that fruit was never waste. It was always a pantry waiting to happen, 15 minutes of preparation, a jar on a warm counter, several weeks of patience, and what comes back is a bottle of something that cannot be bought. Not really. Not the version that comes from a backyard tree and a living mother and weeks of slow conversion in a kitchen that smells like autumn all the way into December. That version only comes from doing it. The apples are already there. The jar is already in the cupboard. The bacteria that will drive the whole process are already living on the skin of every piece of fruit on the ground right now. Everything needed is already there. It always was. The pantry worth building is not the one stocked from a store. It is the one built from what the backyard already provides, season after season, apple by apple, jar by jar. If this video helped make sense of what a backyard apple tree can actually give a pantry, share it with someone who has a tree and does not know what to do with everything it drops every autumn. And if there is something in the backyard pantry that has not been covered yet, drop it in the comments. The next video might be built around it. Subscribe if this is your first visit here, and come back next week. Until then, keep preserving.